Well, I'm sure we've heard some of the reactions from the private sector to some of the breakdown as done by the Minister of Finance in the 2022 budget. Well, we'll have a further breakdown and analysis of what is in that budget and perhaps how we should be looking at it. We have with us this morning Mr. Paul Alaje, who is an economist, senior economist, SPM Professionals, a fellow Institute of Economists, Nigeria, and also a fellow International Management Consultants Board of the United States of America. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me.
And we also have with us, joining us virtually, Mr. Orji Udemoise, who is an economist, member, Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria. He's also a member, Chartered Institute of Personnel Management, member, Nigerian Institute of Training and Development, and also a member, Risk Management Association of Nigeria, RIMAN. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily as well, sir.
Margaret, thank you for having me. Always my pleasure. And Happy New Year, by the way. I'm sure we're speaking for the first time this year. Thank you for having me.
Indeed, Happy New Year to you too. Mr. Alaje, I do not know, when you listen to the breakdown of the budget as done by the Minister of Finance, whether you also thought that from that budget we will be having a really good New Year. Usually we're told that the budget shows where the government is placing priorities. From what you can see in that breakdown, what would you say the government has its priorities for this year?
Well, from what I can see in the budget, priorities of government lies with combating insecurity in the country, and government is putting some money in infrastructure, even though that money is very small compared to what this economy needs this moment today. Government is putting some money also in health and education. Those are critical sectors that government is allocating funds to. But when you go to those sectors and see how much is actually going to capital of all the expenses or all the spendings government will engage in 2022, you see that significant amount will be going to recurrent expenditure. It will be going to overhead, salaries, administration of the entire sector. So not so much is going to capital expenditure. And if you look at education, for instance, government is spending about 1.23 trillion. That looks big, but when you convert the money to US dollars and compare Nigeria with the rest of, say, Africa or some countries like, say, I don't want to use China, but when you compare with some other countries with huge population where you should expect a number of children to be in school,
what about India,
bear in mind,
perhaps?
or India. So when you look at number of children we hope to be in school, they're already out of school children, you see that we are doing really, really, really small. I understand this is just federal government budget, but when you even had state government subnational to this, is still small. The real concern is that we are not spending enough, and we cannot spend enough if we are not generating enough. I give you an instance. 2021 budget, paraded by the minister in the same presentation you just reviewed to us. Government said that when you prorate what they generated, the government was hoping to generate about 8 trillion naira plus. But what government eventually, when you prorate from January to November, that was the basis for this, government was expected to have generated 7.44 trillion. But government did only 74%, less than two-thirds. And I mean from when you calculate it based on January to November, already prorated, 74%. What will fill the gap is either we forget about some capital expenditure or we go borrowing money. And when you look at the variant, we actually borrowed more compared to what we expected to borrow. And this is huge concern because this economy seems not to generate sufficient revenue to, it's like a human that is not earning enough. When you keep borrowing over and over again, someday what happens? Even though country, we are saying our debt to GDP, which the minister mentioned, and I agree with that, that our debt to GDP, we are still in a good position. But GDP is not what we use to pay back. What you use to pay back is revenue. Your revenue is reducing. We are unable to meet our revenue target. And when you look at from January to May, we had 98%. 98% of revenue was used to service debt. Not to pay debt back, not sinking fund, but used to service debt. When you look at from January to November, according to the same presentation by the minister, over 70%. Equivalent of what we use to service them. So It's a major concern that we need to do something. And I'm happy that the minister said, yes, we know this is a concern, that government is doing everything possible to see how they could reduce the pressure of debt service on our revenue.
Well, I'm sure you also heard a few of the measures which were rolled out there, some of the things they're hoping to do to ramp up the increment of revenue. You mentioned infrastructure. We know that oftentimes, even though what we see in the budget is usually small compared to what we need, there have been other external measures. First, well, loans, it has been a huge part of that. We've also seen initiatives on the part of, say, the Ministry of Works to give a tax credit to companies who will be willing to build roads. You know, roads are useful to everyone and themselves as well in that regard. So how much of that do you think we can expect in this year's budget, especially when we look at...
I think a lot are not captured in this budget because when you look at National Development Plan that was passed last month, presented by the President, I mean, so you see that government is hoping to spend over 350 trillion naira. And government is also hoping that private sector will be responsible for 85% of the money, while federal and subnational will take responsibility for the remaining 15%. And this budget is already indicating that. How much of our state we key into that is another conversation entirely, because recall that we have the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. Only 7 states are those that agreed or that aligned with the program of federal government. So that on one side. Private sector now have opportunity to look into what government has presented. So, but the concern which is not really aligned is how did we come about the 350? Did we interview private sector? Did they say they will be spending such money? On which project? I've seen a number of nice projects, government like rail, which we need quite a lot of right now that government has put in place. But when you are looking at the amount of money that we have budgeted for to solve some of these challenges that we have, definitely we will not be able to. But when we bring in private sector and say, yes, this is huge amount we're expecting for private sector, over 250 trillion naira we expect private sector to bring. How will this money come? Are they local investors? Are they foreign investors? Knowing fully well that our rate is quite low now, 11.5%, and with low rate, not so much investment will come into your country. And if we don't make the rate low, we will not grow. So central bank, for instance, Monetary Policy Committee, have to choose between the devil and the deep blue sea. They've held rate for a while, which is really a good thing to do because of the critical moment we have. People are looking at 5% GDP growth rate, 4% GDP growth rate. They were so because the base year was negative. So when you have negative base year, it is normal that you are going to have high growth rate. So we need to wait till this year, by second quarter, and see, are we really growing by 3, by 2, by 5, as we have seen in 2021? So, but by and large, what I think we need to do is buy in the private sector to put more money in all of this. We have seen what happened in Lagos, specifically Apapa-Oshodi Expressway, where Africa's richest man has put a number of investment in road construction. We don't need to wait to have that size. You know, we may look for somebody who could do something smaller. It could be, for instance, FCT. We have a lot of real estate going on. How can FCT, for instance, as a government, FCT administration, partner with some of these investors to say, construct the road, we are going to give you tax credit, as we have seen in the case of Lagos State, did on some of their projects. So we can repeat the same thing, because eventually when you come to Abuja, you will not say this is FCT road. You will not say this is federal government road. What is important is that we want to have quality infrastructure that can compete with what we have seen outside Nigeria. And that is what we drive real investment, not just portfolio investment, to our country.
Well, we've seen some reaction from the private sector, as I did highlight earlier, and as we did see in the papers. It's been, well, I'm trying to see if I can read a few of them. We were seeing this one on the front page of the Vanguard. This 10 naira per litre tax on soft drinks. Their fears that 15,000 direct and indirect jobs could be lost. That's from NLC, LCCI, MAN, and Nasima. I want to ask Mr. Udemuizwe if he also has those fears when he heard about the 10 naira excise duties on carbonated soft drinks.
For me, my sentiment when I heard about that is just that of a government that is very desperate to raise revenue and is willing to, look at any direction to be able to achieve that. Okay, if they have suddenly become very concerned about our health, diabetes and so on, and then the only way to do that is to increase the tax on carbonated or sugary drinks, then that's quite funny to me. Who has given them the duty to manage our health for us? Are there no other ways to run a campaign for people to manage the kind of sugary drinks that they take? So for me, I just see desperation in trying to tax more. But if you ask me, I will tell you that that's not the issue. Trying to charge more taxes on different goods and services in Nigeria is not the problem. What is the governance process in the tax system in Nigeria? How are we sure that all the monies they were making in immigration, in customs, in FIRS, and all of the other tax collecting bodies, how are we sure that the systems are efficient and the distance between these monies collected and the federal government purse, that there are no loopholes in between? I think Nigeria has to look at issues of governance and risk management and efficient allocation of resources, more critically than just charging more money. Let us look at these systems, the federal FIRS and the all the other bodies, the inland waterways system, the customs, immigration. Let us ensure that what is collected and what is reported are very close. That's very important in this country where we are struggling with the revenue issues. And even are we putting, round pegs in round holes in appointing people who manage these institutions? And what level of corruption do we see in these institutions? These are more important than just trying to, if you are hemorrhaging, if you are bleeding, the only way to solve that problem is not to administer more blood to the patient. You find a way to cut off the reason why bleeding is going on. And that's the approach this government has to follow. We keep talking about not having enough revenue, which is true, but how do we look into the revenue collection system? Some year, about 3-4 years ago, we were told that FIRS, collected up to 5 trillion naira. But the much of that went into the federal budget was quite, paltry. These are the kind of challenges that we should be having, we should be addressing. So that's, for me, my sentiment towards the extra charge on sugary drink. Very soon, they will look at other things to charge and give us a reason to do that. That's not the solution. We must look at governance and the procedure for collecting this. And this, also includes the way our states, and the federal government institutions are run and managed. Are we efficiently allocating resources in these, institutions? How are we spending most of our budget in, personnel costs, overhead, and the current expenditure? In a place like a Jakarta Steel Mill, for example, a lot was budgeted to it, but year in, year out, nothing is going on there. In some oil and gas institutions where we are, we have refineries and so on, these refineries have never worked. They have never refined a liter of crude oil, and yet we are spending a lot in salaries. And government said there's not enough scope to cut down on the current expenditure, and we keep spending trillions. In fact, we spend much more than our normal revenue. Like my friend has already said, we estimated to have gathered about 5.7 trillion revenue, which is even very impressive compared to previous years. So, but how do you want to spend 17 trillion naira when your actual revenue is somewhere below 6 trillion? And we keep going into debt and massaging ourselves that, our debt to GDP ratio is still quite manageable. What about your economy's productive capacity to pay that debt? So as long as your revenue is poor and you're not spending enough on infrastructure to ramp up productivity, we'll continue to borrow and borrow until we go cap in hand again and stay for debt forgiveness. So governance and management of our resources has to do with all of these issues. We are still running a very large government structure, and we're not willing to look at that. We haven't got a transformational leader who wants to say, what do we do to scale down our expenditure in government? We have multiple agencies, multiple government institutions, almost duplicating things, doing the same thing, and yet we are staffing them and we're paying for them because government over the years had focused on creating employment instead of providing an enabling environment, ease of doing business to enable the SME sector and private sector drive employment generation. That's part of what has brought us to where we are today, where government is spending so much in what we call it, in recurrent expenditure, in personnel cost, overhead and all of that. Like my friend has already said, in a budget of 1.2 trillion in education, a whole lot of that, which you also showed us here, a whole lot is going to recurrent expenditure. And that's the structure of the economy. Let me assure you that the 32% allocated to capital expenditure in this budget 2022 cannot happen. We always propose these things at the beginning of the year, but we most times don't look back at the end of the year to look at what happened the previous year. Can they tell us reliably what was spent on infrastructure last year, despite about 30% estimation on capital expenditure in that year? We don't have these facts. We only hear the proposals, we don't get the actual spend, and most times we hear prorating of a figure, maybe either from August of the year or September of the year. We now prorate and say, oh, even our revenue prorated or annualized is about this. What of the actual revenue at the end of the year? Can they care enough maybe in the next 1 month to show us a dashboard of what was spent in 2021, right from the capital expenditure, recurrent, and so on? That's the problem of this economy: poor reporting, poor accountability, and all of that. And like I said, inefficient allocation of our resources, corruption, and so on, and poor fiscal and monetary policies. If time allows, Mape, we'll look at what can this government do, by way of fiscal and monetary policies to drive development. In the midst of COVID, when Nigeria's foreign exchange earnings has more than tumbled, and we're having a very magical dance between Naira and the dollar, what can we do to drive export? Is it morally right for central bank to insist that exporters must submit their money to government at 414, while somebody buys that money off them and round trips at 550? Is that an efficient way to run economy? IMF has constantly said that we need to transform this, reform in our FX market and several other places. We keep a deaf ear and keep expecting that something magical will happen for this economy to grow. This is the time to drive export, whether of grains, of vegetable, of solid minerals, and so on. But what policies do we need to drive export, to promote export, and to allow exporters become the kings when they come in with their dollars? Or are you going to force them to submit their dollar to you, and then somebody buys it doing nothing and earns over 100 Naira over the dollar just in the parallel market window? We must think with evidence-based data to drive the right policy. Let me stop here at this point until maybe you get back to me again. Thank you.
Well, Ms. Alaje, I know you did talk about recurrent expenditure, and you can respond to what you just heard if you like. But in addition to that, how do we approach that? Do we need reforms? What should be done about that component? Because, I mean, they tell you, do you want us to sack people? Much as borrowing to fund recurrent expenditure, definitely not a good economic policy. What will your recommendations be?
Okay, so 2 in 1. First of all, to respond and to answer the question. For me, I'm completely surprised. I'm in shock when I heard that we have added 10 Naira. What we should have done is to have measured demand elasticity for those drinks. So government may be assuming that whatever the price is, many people are addicted. So companies will still sell. But without looking at the books of those companies, will they always sell? That is why you're seeing NLC and other institutions of government say, hey, what you are doing, you did not follow the process in economics. You need to look at price elasticity. If the price increase by 1 Naira, how will demand respond? And the most important thing here is the demand side. We keep looking at our population, 206 million, but we forgot that 40 to 42% of that population is poor. So I think that, well, it's already been signed by the president, and we need to deal with about 10 to 15,000 jobs that are on the line. And recall that National Bureau of Statistics, as our last quarter said, 33% of the labor force are unemployed. And when you say labor force does not mean Nigerian population. It means the potential population that can work. So you have about 70 million thereabout. 33% of the 70 million are out of job. Meanwhile, you have another over 100 million that are too old or too young to work. I think government may need to start engaging private sector more before making some policy. Because if these institutions have been carried along before this policy is made, I don't think we'll be having this kind of reaction. Now, speaking about reforms, The truth is that as an economy, we need a major reform. And this reform must be export-oriented. Now, when you look at what our exchange rate was, some years ago, we had exchange rate about 200, later to about 315, to 360, 390. Today, we are about 414. And I don't even want to talk about what is happening in parallel markets, because in that market, you might see as high as 570, which is huge. And when you want to import, and I can tell you because as somebody who has brought in equipment for production in this country and even in this city, Abuja, accessing FX from central bank could be, you are going to engage in a battle. You know, I don't know of recent time, but because of production and manufacturing that we're going to engage in, it was really very, very difficult. Meanwhile, suppliers in the other part of the country, they don't care about your policy challenges and implications. If you don't pay a certain due, there are agreements, you are going to pay more. So where do? You will be forced to go to a market where you pay almost 20–30% more. And these are reality. How do we encourage export? And to encourage export, I mean manufacturing. For instance, government attention has been paid on rice. And government has said, oh, we are going to focus on farmers. If you focus on farmers and they produce a lot of rice paddy, and you don't have functional mills, you know, to refine this rice or to process this rice and bag them, we will still be eating quote and unquote, oh God, rice. You know, the ones with stones. So, but if you don't encourage more and more meals, modern meals that can dry, that can parboil, you know, that can do all of those, it will be a lot of challenge for us. So, attention of government should be, how do we promote production? And I've said that a country with a population, China is the largest in the whole Asia. But I think around Southern Asia, you have India as the largest population. In Europe, you have Germany. Most of these countries, including America and North America, what they are known for is manufacturing. Even Brazil is moving towards manufacturing. Because when you look at the countries I mentioned, they have the largest population. Come to Africa. Nigeria is the largest population in Africa because of our numbers. I'm not saying agriculture is not good. I love agriculture. I think we should do it. But what we stimulate agriculture and service is for us to focus on production. That is when state government will generate personal income tax. That is when government will generate more from company income tax, because more industry will come mainstream. People are going to have sustainable jobs. At that time, you are going to now see more of education, because people will now be serious and they will be prepared to go to work. But go to the streets of Lagos, go to the streets, you know, of some of the states, you see what our youth have turned to. Because even those of them that have schooled, they don't have decent job they can do. $30,000 is the minimum wage. Convert it, even at official rate.
30,000 naira. I
mean, 30,000 naira.
Yeah, you said dollars.
Oh, wait, sorry. 30,000 naira, I beg your pardon. 30,000 naira is the minimum wage. No, I hope it will be $30,000 anyway. But 30,000 naira, divide that by 30 days. You have about 1,000 naira. That's the minimum wage. What can that buy? So it's a huge issue if we don't, at this moment, start considering how to become a productive nation. GDP is gross domestic product. We need to, and that should mean a lot anyways. So we need to start thinking of how do we become productive? How do we engage in manufacturing and processing? It is a difficult thing most governments have been silent about. And if you're silent about it, that means you'll not be committed to increased power supply. You will not be committed to increased infrastructure of about 17 trillion, which I doubt so very much. And I doubt the figure, because where will the revenue of about 10 trillion naira come from? Above 10 trillion naira. Last year to November, we did 5. You are saying that we are going to do something magical, and we are going to multiply the revenue by 2 in 2022. Oh, I doubt if that will be possible. So whatever we are doing as fiscal authority will be to support manufacturing, but monetary authority here is also very important. Inflation at double digits. We're having 15.4% inflation, and I've heard a number of persons say, well, inflation is coming down, even though inflation is increasing at a reducing rate. And from this budget estimate, government have also said we might not see inflation as single digits this year. What does that mean if you want to transform the economy? It means that we might be grooming more poor people. Because when you have high inflation and sustained double-digit inflation from about 2016 till date, we have had double-digit inflation. I hope that authority in coming period, we start to think of how do we create more jobs using that sector, which is manufacturing sector. Now, economy is divided into three. You have the primary, you have the secondary, you have the tertiary. Secondary is where manufacturing lies, is where conversion lies, and it's where authority will need to see how to make policy and start making.
All right, just give us a moment. We'll be back from this break and let you shed a lot more light on perhaps that inflation and then the economy division in different parts as you're just talking about now. That will be in just a moment. Don't go away. Welcome back, Mr. Alaje. If we could just follow up on that inflation bit which you raised. Yes, different manufacturers have also, they raised concerns about the government's 13% assumption on inflation in this budget, where they say as of August 2022, it was about 17.02%. So they thought that that might not be quite realistic. So looking at that particular scenario, how do you think we should have approached it?
Well, I think inflation is maybe a bit higher than 13%. And when we say 13%, we are losing the people. When you have heard that inflation has been reducing, but when you go to the market, you have seen prices of commodity increasing. So what government may need to tell people, which National Bureau of Statistics, I'm not sure which of the authorities need to explain this, is that when you compare inflation, you are comparing year on year. What happened last year compared to what happened this year. And there is a different data for quarter on quarter and a different data for month on month. So inflation, the way I see it, the impact is so much on the people. And with low monetary policy rates, because economy is not growing enough, Monetary Policy Authority needs to slow down and see how we can attract more business, expand the economy, which is actually the policy that they've embarked on. But all of these, they are having implication on prices. And the higher the price for inputs, the more challenging it becomes for manufacturer to keep going on. What they do is either increase their price in case where price elasticity make provision for that. But when there are no provision within price elasticity, if the demand will respond negatively, then they ask some staff to go. So we should not be surprised that as our inflation continues to increase, it has touched 18% 2 times within 6 years. As inflation continues to increase, we are going to be seeing more and more job losses. We have continued to see unemployment figures also continue to increase. When inflation is increasing and unemployment is also increasing, it means that the economy is not doing well enough. So we hope that the 13% government has mentioned, they will be able to support it with policy. But we should also understand that what we have now is just a projection, is an estimate. We had in Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, the inflation will be so low, and by now we might be even experiencing single-digit inflation. But today, Economic Recovery and Growth Plan is no more in place. Most of these projections were not achieved, and I can say maybe 40 or 45% of projection is what that plan was able to achieve. Again, COVID came and even plunged some of the expectation of Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, and it made a mess of the entire document in the later part of it. So I think that authority will need to do more in terms of the projection for inflation, because I really don't see, official and unofficial figures having that low figure. Even 13% World Bank is warning. And I don't know if you have seen World Bank report, an IMF staff report that came out last month, and warning Nigeria that we need to do more with our economy. If not, we may be plunged back into a recession. But that's on one side. Government is also saying that the subsidy may be removed. And if subsidy is removed, what happens? This is the conversation around subsidy. Government may remove subsidy of about 1 point something trillion, and you would have seen in the presentation by Honorable Minister. He said they will block some of the subsidies and all of those things that is putting so much pressure on government revenue. That is nice. But how do you block subsidy and expect that inflation will remain 13%? That do not agree. I understand that some international organizations are telling government that inflation would only increase by 1 or 2%. But those international organizations should go back time in the past and see that each time we remove subsidy, because Nigeria economy revolves around energy. And when I say energy, I mean gas, domestic gas, the one we consume at home, fuel, and electricity. If you remove subsidy, you are going to see a sporadic jump in inflation because it's going to have impact on virtually everything. Pure water seller on the street of Agege will tell you subsidy has improved. We used to know pure water for about 5 naira, later 10 naira. These days, if you want to buy 2, you are told it's about 30 naira or as maybe 15 naira because prices have continued to go up. So if you remove subsidy, it's also going to have tremendous negative impact on the lives of people. So what should we do? I think that before we remove subsidy, because I'm not saying don't remove subsidy, what we should do is that our output, local output, either through modular refineries or four refinery owned by government or private sector refinery that we have heard so much about, should come mainstream and produce our output, at least our monthly or quarterly or annual output. That is the time we can say demand and supply equate. But if we say we remove subsidy and we are open to import, are we not going to continue to put pressure on our foreign reserve? And we say that foreign reserve is reducing to about $40 billion. Have we really solved the problem of reserves pressure? We're now saying that that cushioning that government is providing should go to all Nigerians. Because that is the interpretation that we are getting from our government statement. And government said, oh, we're going to give 5,000 naira to about 40 million people, you know, very poor people. And I look at BVN, less than 60 million Nigerians have a BVN. And these 60 million Nigerians, majority of them are within the middle class. So when you give 40 million to people and we want to do direct transfer, where are they? People in remote areas that are poor, the poorest, and that's the argument where Minister of Humanitarian Affairs is saying that we're giving direct because these people don't have bank accounts. So what are we going to do so that, because when we want to give 40 million people money, it means that our BVN number will also shoot up, increase significantly. You know, but if we have about less than 60 million people that have unique bank verification numbers, and we want to also give, my opinion is that instead of giving that money as cash, why don't we give it as loan to those with modular refinery licenses and bring a number of them together, let them start operation. It may take between 12 to 18 months for most of these things to come mainstream. And when you add that to the private refinery we have been thinking about, another person has also gotten a major license for private refinery. And we have output. It is until that time we can be talking of removal of subsidy. But when we have not done our primary assignment and it looks good, it looks easy to remove subsidy, I'm afraid that inflation will not be nice on any of us at all.
Well, let me take this to Mr. Udeme as well. Mr. Alaje, one of the things that came to mind as you spoke is you're an economist. I believe there are economists in the National Assembly who worked with them to come up with the figures that they came up with. I believe there are economists in the federal government, the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, who helped to crunch those figures. So how come we seem to be having all of these conversations? I don't know. But let me come to you, Mr. Udeme. Look at some of the critical sectoral allocation in the 2022 budget. My concern here is how futuristic, I use that word advisedly. We know that every budget is alive from the January of that same year to December, at least so speaking for the 2022 budget, a tradition that this government has tried to sustain. But one would expect that the impact of the budget would be beyond the year 2022. Look at the education sector, for instance, and from information available says it's just 7.2% of the budget.
And the Ministry of Education and agencies, recurrent and capital expenditure, Universal Basic Education Commission gets some money, Tertiary Education Trust Fund, TED Fund gets 6 billion naira. This literally speaking to two major tiers of education in the country, and of course the recurrent and capital expenditure for the Ministry of Education and its agencies. What do you make of it, especially in the space of nation building? Because one would expect that a budget such as this for education should be futuristic.
All right, Ayo, I think you've also answered the same question you've asked me. This budget is just the traditional thing we see every year. Just make these transfers to these bodies to maintain basic overhead, pay salaries, and ensure that the institutions are running the way, the best way they can. But like you said, there's no room for new thinking, access to digital education, ensuring our children in the midst of COVID are able to have access to data, to learn online and all of that. None of that is being factored in here. The fact that the world is going digital, fintech, ICT-driven education, and the fact that Nigeria needs to get more competitive, in our ranking, education and training is one of the major issues that we have when we look at the global competitive index, the GCI index that is done by the World Economic Forum. We're not doing very well there because Nigeria is not thinking futuristic. How do we also promote skills acquisition, IT skills, and so on? What you see is the traditional 6-3-3-4 system to sustain it, to ensure that the federal universities continue to at least pay salaries. If you go to these universities, you find that the libraries are not well equipped. The laboratories are still using the same chemical that I probably used in about 1991, 92, when I went through my university education. Things have not changed. The hostels are in shambles. Things are not being done. Apart from some grants, we have like TED Fund and other kind of grants that these universities attract on their own. You find that government is barely trying to, manage the existing, institutions, both at the primary, secondary, and tertiary level of education. Nothing is being done about digital education, ICT approach to education, online learning, building skills, closing the gap between the university education we have in Nigeria today and the modern skills required to run most modern enterprises. So you find that many graduates from Nigeria are still hugely unemployable. And even though when we find ourselves out of the shores of this country, we all become excellent because we have access to new educational equipment and tools to upskill and become more productive. So that's the problem we're having here. The education budget is 7%, much, much lower than the UNESCO recommendation of about 50 to 20% of, economies that are growing like Nigeria. That's developing economies. That we should be able to build people. People drive economies. Human capital is core to even every business. And Nigeria and Africa are not doing so well in the hospitality industry, in all the service industries, in manufacturing, even in modern agriculture, because of the quality we put in our people. If you don't develop your people, you cannot move forward. Today, where economies are run based on human capital development, digital enhancement and so on, access to even farming. Farming today, fintech-driven farming, fintech-driven SME business, access to funds and all of that. But where are we? A Nigerian graduate is struggling to go and do barbing salon and just do something to escape, basic poverty. It is that sad. This budget has no hope for education. I can just tell you for sure, which you know already, is just to keep, maintaining the system as best as they can. Nothing strategic is happening to revive the educational system and create impetus for people to come out, running on their, on all cylinders to develop the different sectors of the economy. It's quite sad, but can this government also boldly and pragmatically, involve the private sector to take part, in this process? Thankfully enough, we have a lot of private people coming into the university system, the secondary school education system. How do we open it more for more partnership between government and private sector? And how do we, beyond the basic academic education that we go through, How do we ensure that we also promote, on-the-job training, skills acquisition for those who are not able to go through formal education? How do we ensure that enterprise development systems, are enhanced beyond what some institutions do currently? Having EDC centers. How do we take this to the street? Ensure people like Paul, people like me, who can build capacity to work with government to ensure that public servants are developed to a point where they can, gladly leave, their employment and become entrepreneurs and, create space in that government place, reduce recurrent expenditure, and people can drive development. Every economy, Paul had mentioned them earlier, Brazil, China, US, they are all driven by, private sector, SMEs. No economy can, create jobs. No economy can, produce as much as, their frontiers can take, looking at the production possibility frontiers. We cannot expand that frontier without human capital, without, skill acquisition, without SME drive, of the economy. That's
but Mr.
Udemeze, and the health sector, which also supports human capital.
We'll come to the health sector. We'll come to the health sector in a bit, Mr. Udemeze. But, a budget has to, any funding that you are going to put into anything has to work with a policy. Will it be just to say that we do not have enough resources budgeted for education if we do not have a policy that supports these things that you're talking about?
Yes, I agree with you that Nigeria does not yet have a clear map what we want to do with 200 million Nigerians in this country. We have no clear map how to develop their capacity to be more productive and how to enhance their ability to put more into this economy. If we have that clear map and we cannot fund it with our own money, then we can begin to look at how do we get funded by, private sector and so on. So there's no clear strategy on how to develop human capital in Nigeria. When COVID caught us all, locked down, people just camped out to see what they could do to get their children learning. In primary and secondary, schools in Nigeria run by government, you found that these children could not afford data. They couldn't even afford any tablet. Who gives them an Android phone to be able to do class? So you found them abundantly, dormant at home, doing nothing. It's only the few private, sector-driven educational systems that, try to get their parents, the students get some, apps, maybe Android phones or iPads and so on, to be able to follow, digital classes going on. The rest of the, poor children were just there playing and wasting away. And many of them have actually also left the system and will never come back. So the dropout rate is increasing. So government has to be very strategic in dealing with, issues in education in Nigeria. We have to sit down and ask ourselves, how do we enhance the capacity of 200 million Nigerians to be able to play both locally and internationally, such that if they cannot get a job here, we can, leverage on globalization to enable us get a job in Ghana, get a job in Canada and elsewhere, and while we look at an improving gross national product, also while driving the gross domestic product locally here. So you got it right. Policy is not there yet, and the funding is a major issue. You can see us spending a lot more now to manage, do damage control. 2.4 trillion in security to manage human beings who were not developed, who have no capacity to do anything, who have not become terrorists, who have become distractions to us. We are spending a lot there, and so much more of this will happen. God forbid if we fail to do the right thing right now. If you can't develop them, then wait for them in the bush, wait for them, in the rough areas, and you spend a lot more trying to do amnesty, trying to recover them, than if you were proactive in developing them to become war players.
Okay. Well, let me take the same question to. We'll come to the health sector, Mr. Udemeze. But let me take this same question to Mr. Alaje, but asking it a little differently. The states also will have their own budgets for education. Do you see any kind of buffer? I ask that against the backdrop of something you said earlier about us focusing on agriculture, for instance. A good number of people that we have asked along the line of what we can do to even encourage interest of young people in agriculture. Some agricultural lecturers say that their students are not interested in agriculture, studying agriculture in the classes. So with these budgets, especially for tertiary education, find a way to marry this with even expediting action in agriculture, at least in our agroeconomy in Nigeria?
Okay, so thank you so very much. There are no connections between our farms, education, and the market. So what state government and federal government do every year is the ritual. We need to allocate something, at least there are workers. We've seen what Governor Rufai did in Kaduna when he exposed some of the things that are happening within the education sector. And it's not just in Kaduna State, it's the reality all over the country. I've gone to a state where teaching was reward for winning elections. So they say, how many people supported us and they don't have job? Let them go and teach. And you see people in public schools, children of civil servants, or maybe not civil servants, or let me say, not even civil servants, poor people. So what becomes of them? So the allocation that we give to education sector is not, there is no goal in mind. And what do I mean by goal in mind? We have a lot of vast land. And I know a number of times you were in the plane and you look down to look at what is happening. You see everywhere unarranged. But when we talk about agriculture, we're saying that when people farm and it's not just using hoes and cutlasses, we're saying that it is planned, it is organized, it is not small, it is massive. So we need some level of education. The same with when you farm. How will your farm get to the marketplace? What happens to standard? What happens to quality? Nigeria has huge opportunity now that we have Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. But do we have quality labor to do that? I've seen people interested in media. I can see you and your colleagues, you are doing excellently well in your field. But do we have people who have gone to school to study farming and will be doing excellently well in farming? I'm not saying there are none, but what is the number? Compared to the number we are graduating, and those that,
Mr. Alaje,
it's not that they want to study anything related to agriculture.
Just one second, Mr. Alaje. On that same issue, just a second. On that same issue that you raised, is there a policy of government that's really focused on developing agriculture long term? Because it's only on that, I've heard it said over and over again, that if there is no policy, there is nothing to execute. So is there a policy, or would you propose a policy along agroeconomy in Nigeria that the budget would fund? Because unless there is such a thing, I don't know how we're going to go about that.
Well, there are different policies, but will the policy take us to these targets is a different ballgame entirely. Now, what I have proposed, because when you look at food inflation, it's a major driver for headline inflation. Core inflation most of the time perform lower, has lower rates compared to food inflation. My suggestion to government, which has also been documented a number of times, is we have over 200,000 core members. They say they are going to serve. You find some of them in Antipat Nursery and Primary School. I don't think such school exists, by the way. So you find them in schools, you find them in all manner of places. My proposition is government should organize farms. You know, in the First Republic, and I think part of Second Republic, we have organized farms in places, in villages, so that government knows what they are producing here is cassava. In this other part, then we have core members that will work with locals, you know, who might not have that kind of education. Then we now start training people. So when people leave school, when they leave service, they will not say they are out of job. They know how to farm. We have trainers and other people working with them. Our food output, the supply side, will significantly improve compared to what we have today. There will be nothing like, oh, I don't have any food to produce. But let me quickly mention this. We have heard about rice. You can ask anybody within the value chain of rice today, the biggest challenge that is available is paddy. You can ask anybody, the biggest challenge from the big names to the small boys. Paddy, and that is why you are having high prices. If we buy paddy at 230,000 per ton, 1,000 naira per ton, how do you expect miller to sell to the market? How do you expect wholesalers and distributors to sell? How do you expect consumers to sell? And by December this year, it might be going to 35 to 40,000. Why? No sufficient paddy. People just go to land. We have land here. There are no deliberations. There is no action, consciousness. in solving the problem. We know that is the staple food we perhaps consume the most. And until government look at people they can manage, they can control, and in this instance, core members, and organize, we have, what do we call it, NYSC, we have a body that government can work with, maybe through the Ministry of Agriculture. They can partner with Ministry of Agriculture or Ministry of Youth, Sport and Youth, or Youth and Sport. They could come together, partner, and see how we can get more core members to farms and get even locals. You know, when you had about 200,000 to people that are farming right now, within 1 year or 9 months, as the case may be, the supply of coppers is consistent. But that does not mean it will be that easy. One of the things government needs to guarantee is land that will be provided by states. Number 2, security of life of those core members. Number 3, tools that they will work with. And it will not be through hoes and cutlass. Go to some local government. You don't see presence of any tractor in an area where they should be doing massive farming. Farming from time to time. But that is not what we see. So government has opportunity. When it's election, we bring this core member. What is the productivity level? So after election, during election, we realize that, oh, you are serving government, so you have to come. But things that sustain everybody, which is farming, why can't we organize it? Put policy together, call people in agri sector, call NYSC member. You can even test run with 2,000 or 10,000. Choose a particular location, provide security, and see what the output will be like. And you'll be shocked when they even leave service. Some of these people, they may go back to their villages or to their homes. They may see land and say they want to continue this practice. And you may ask somebody that read medicine, what will he be doing on farm? Is needed. It can provide health services to them. Economists are needed. People that read anything, even media. You know, those days when we were on camp, we had media people, you know, talking to us and speak. Everything is needed. We need to create those small community of farmers, and that will even bring businesses to those environments to have positive impact on the GDP. The benefit cannot be exhausted in a way.
Well, there'll be big questions. I mean, now that you are suggesting that we use coppers, I know that the coppers will certainly have reactions to that. But I'm wondering, you know, whether or not you think that the Anchor Borrowers Program is working.
Well, the Anchor Borrowers Program has good intention. But in instances where people have partnered with farmers, and I give you classical an example in Kebbi State, where some persons have put, where is lake rice? Where is lake rice? So people put their money down, gave to farmers. On the day of harvest, the seeds disappeared. Who is guaranteeing those outputs? Who is the guarantor? I beg your pardon. Who is the person that guarantees and gives confidence? So the person who borrowed directly from government, from central bank, we have to pay back. So we still cannot manage these farmers. And if governors say you need to pay back, we have seen the harvest and all of the celebration we see all over the screen, but where is the result? Central bank is doing a lot. I must confess to you.
I certainly know that, you know, in the next couple of days, and there have been indications. We've been seeing a rice pyramid stock being built along the airport road here in Abuja. And well, we've been told there are hints that there's going to be a rice festival. I'm not sure who's organizing that, but what we are seeing now is a pyramid of rice, perhaps to show that the policy around rice is working. But from what you're saying now, it looks like there's still a lot more to be done.
I'm one of the operators in that sector. So what I want you to do, go to millers. Millers are people that take paddy and ask them, what is your biggest challenge? I am not saying, if government had not intervened at all, it would have been a mess. So we have this reduced impact because of government intervention. But when you deal with a set of people that don't have some level of understanding, you're going to have issues. I don't know if you understand my point. So I'm not saying government is not trying at all. Government has not done something within the sector. But with our population and what we consume, it is just not sufficient. What we should be looking at is how do we do more? You know, in terms of this, central bank, the program is very beautiful. But how do we adjust such programs such that farmers will not suddenly say their output has been washed away by flood? And you say that, is it just your farm that flood came to? I'm not saying there are no floods. But in a case where you just go to a section in local government and it's only the local government flood decided to come to, and the remaining local government flood exempted them, And flood will only come when harvest season comes. So is there an alignment between flood and harvest? And what will central bank do? There are no representative, permanent representative on those farms. And if you want to say that because some of these things happen in Cornwall, they may even say that, oh, bandits said we should not come to farm. But you already have your investment and stuff. And that's why this insecurity matter, we should not take it lightly. Whatever government can do, because those that are real operators within the real sector, they are going through pains.
Mr. Alaje, we have to thank you. But just before, we thank you, let me quickly take, in 30 seconds, the last words of our guest who's on with us virtually. Mr. Ojemuze.
Okay, yeah, well, Nigerian economy has a great potential to lead Africa in development and in growth. Nigeria's manufacturing sector is about the largest in Africa, but is hugely inefficient. Let me leave us with this word that this is the time to promote agriculture and manufacturing for real, not just to do that when oil prices go down and we pay lip service to economic diversification. The idea of anchor borrowing and Nestle and the rest of them came when we were in a hurry to ramp up FX earnings. Now it seems the OPEC Plus is doing magic and oil price has remained relatively stable and we are relaxing. There must be clear strategy in agriculture, in manufacturing, in education and health. And we have to sit down and map out this strategy and invite investors that will invest, hoping that we deal with insecurity that enable us bring in proper investment. And let central bank please do something about our FX policy. We must not keep devaluing tactically. We must act proactively to open up other avenues of FX supply and not just central bank providing all the supply and hemorrhaging and getting our external reserve go down and down. God will help us this year, we pray so. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for your comments this morning. We have to thank you so much for joining us. Mr. Orji Udemezwe is an economist, a member, Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria, member, Chartered Institute of Personnel Management, and also a member of the Nigerian Institute of Training and Development. He's joined us from Nnewi via Zoom. We've also had with us here Mr. Paul Alaje, who is an economist, senior economist, SPM Professionals, fellow Institute of Economists of Nigeria, and also fellow International Management Consultants Board of the United States. Thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you so much.
Well, we take a break now, and we'll be getting one major response, or should I say reaction, to what you've heard now, and perhaps further explanation and clarification on some other policies of government. Please stay with us.
Welcome back. Well, yes, we've got Mr. Gabasho, who is a senior special assistant to the President on Media and Publicity. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today on Sunrise Daily, Mr. Chairman. Happy New Year to you.
Same to you. I appreciate this opportunity. Happy New Year to all of you guys there.
Well, yeah, already lots of reactions concerning the President's interview, and rightly so. The Daily is already quoting him saying he's looking forward to 17 months so that he can go. He's done his best. Are you equally looking forward to your 17 months? How does that feel for you?
Well, I must say that we are fortunate to have been given this opportunity to serve by the President. If you look back at people who occupied the job we're doing, I and Femi, in the past, I'm not sure you had anyone running these offices for more than 2-3 years. Maximally 3 years, and then they are moved. So we've been here 7 years, yes. So, yeah, it's not a bad idea to look to new challenges after 17 months from now.
When the President says that he's done his best, age is telling on him, many wonder, would they be right to then say, well, in that case, we may not expect so much more from the President in terms of perhaps policy, development, across board?
On the contrary, I think that the President is determined to make the last push for major policies, major infrastructure projects that he believes must be delivered before he leaves. The President can be very casual sometimes in speaking and jovial and jocularly. I think this is what people fail to understand of him. They need to understand how in the first place he was persuaded, pressured into accepting, to even run in the first instance. He had served as a governor, minister, and military head of state, and that's the highest it could get. He had retired home, and Nigerians came and said, well, you are the right person for this moment. We need you. It took some persuasion. So yes, it is right for the president to say, well, he has given his best, and when the time is up, he goes, and some other person will take over.
I know that you're well aware of how election years usually are in government. I mean, you've seen several of those scenarios, how that such times like this, it's usually difficult for governments to achieve much because there's usually a lot of focus and attention on what's going to happen next politically. So do you think this will be any different? Will they be able to achieve, will government be able to achieve as much as they'd like to?
Yeah, I think it depends on the focus which they bring to bear on what they want to do. And happily, you have a president who is not going to do 2023 hands-on. He has told the interview panel he's not going to write the script for 2023. He's not going to anoint. He's not a kingmaker. So he's focused on his job, and the actors in the field are there, scrambling for, competing for offices, and it's up to Nigerians to determine who will lead them. I think that the president is determined. He wants to ride on Abuja-Kaduna Expressway back home. When he finishes 2023, he has said it clearly, I want to go ride on that road and go home. So a number of projects of key priority, he is focused upon: the Niger Second Bridge, Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, East-West Expressway, the railway, Calabar, Lagos, Maiduguri, Port Harcourt, Maiduguri, Ibadan, Kano. All of these things are matters of priority, and he is seeking to commission a number of them before he leaves. And we're hoping that this will be achieved.
Well, you talked about the last push earlier. And one of the things that the president said in the interview with our colleagues is to reiterate the fact that just about 2.5% of Nigeria's arable land is being cultivated. One wonders then, how significant a push will the president be willing to make or intending to make to grow the agroeconomic capacity or potential of Nigeria? What's your take on that? Because, I mean, looking at the budget breakdown, there are questions around how significantly we intend to push Nigeria's agroeconomy.
I think that if you want to see growth in that sector, you should look beyond federal government spending in that area. The government of Nigeria doesn't have all the money that is required to grow agriculture. It has to be driven by all tiers of government, and more so the private sector. The government must be in a position to provide the enabling environment. He has talked about young people who finish from university aspiring for government jobs that are unavailable. Now, as we speak, we have in the state I come, Kano, we have an association of graduate farmers. People who have said, okay, we got the certificates, MA, BSc, MSc. Let's go and do something different. Nobody is regretting, among those people. They're doing quite well, and I'm aware that in a number of states also, and graduates have come together, organized, and they have gone into agriculture, and they're reaping the dividends of their own decision.
Well, one of the things the president said about agriculture is to improve infrastructure. And in that line, he was talking about, buying tractors and all those things which have to be brought into the country. And when I heard that part, the question that came to my mind was, if only we had Ajaokuta steel rolling mill active. And there's been a lot of talk about that within the 7 years so far of this administration. How far with that? I mean, there are those who are wondering, maybe if that was active and, really viable, maybe we'll not be having, at least we'll be looking forward to reduced spending in infrastructure from abroad. We'll be getting them more at home.
I totally agree with you on this one. And to say that, this government has done more than any other in bringing life back to Jakarta. The president engaged the Russian, the Russians who put together the plant. The highest level met Mr. Putin and extracted a commitment from the Russian presidency that they will join us to do this. And the Russians had come, they had met with the officials, the Ministry of Mines and Steel, and progress would be. I think blame COVID for the interruption of that process, because the engagement had seriously begun and then COVID came and everyone was paralyzed in a way. So I am hoping that perhaps in the year 2022, the Minister of Solid Minerals, who is actively pushing for the return of Ajakuta, would deliver results before the administration leaves office. Yes, manufacturing at home would help, and I believe that we're well on the way.
Another issue that was a little thorny in that interview was that of power, and my colleague pointedly asked, where is the power? I was actually expecting a reference to the Siemens agreement. I didn't get it. How far with that?
Well, but the president also said at 2 points in the course of that interview, or was it the interview with the NTA? Let's not talk too much about it. Let's deliver. Because the thing is that the thing with power and so many other things in the country is, I think that Nigerians are getting sick of being given promises and they want to see results on the ground. I think, okay, the other issue was the vaccine thing. The president said that. So let's deliver it. And I think that you see how we ended the year 2021. The Minister of Power was before the cabinet. He delivered the largest number of any request for approval for federal by Executive Council by any minister that I know in the 2 terms of President Muhammad Buhari. 16 memos were okayed. Most of them linked to the Siemens project. So we're ready to go with the Siemens. Procurements are ongoing. And yes, power would improve, will grow incrementally, and we'll get there.
Well, I know that I think the party, the authorities, everybody knew that the privatization happened before the APC then promised that they were going to address that power supply challenge that the country have. I think at some point in one of those documents, we saw 40,000 megawatts, I think for 4 years, or is it for 8 years? And at some point, they said, okay, on a yearly basis, 10,000 megawatts. And now, none of those targets have even been met. One wonders how difficult really is it clear now that the party clearly overpromised and underdelivered?
No, on the contrary, I think that the situation on the ground constrained the government and the party from delivering much more than we have. Don't forget that as we speak today, we have doubled our availability to homes and factories in the country. In terms of generation, it has been increased 200 times. Today, this country, we have capacity to provide, to generate more than 13,000 megawatts of power. We're given the uptake is only is up to 5,000 as we speak now. That is not the best, but it is an improvement on the 2,500 megawatts that we inherited. This government inherited, as you rightly said, a privatization process, which the president said in the interview with their channel, that it was largely driven by the need to gratify political interests. People were, they were dashed away at political interests. Without capacity, without interest, everyone thought the power sector was another MTN or Econet, and they were just coming to make money. cheaply without putting in one penny. And the worst thing was that the owners, the new owners of the Fiscal, they were fortified sufficiently by the law to ensure that they are protected by the kind of aspiration, the wish to act as the Buhari administration has shown. And we have shown a capacity to circumvent them. This thing about willing power, willing buyer, willing seller scheme that was introduced by Minister of Power is a very innovative thing that we're able to go behind and beyond them and deliver bulk power to people who are willing. It's sad we don't have sufficient power in our homes, in our factories, but we have sufficient capacity. Generation is about 8,000 megawatts. And the generation 13,000, transmission about 8,000, but the uptake is just about 5,000 as it is now. And no matter how much you pressure them, the discourse won't just take power, they reject it.
Mr. Shehu, assuming that were the case in terms of the privatization exercise, them being fortified and prepared, when the government then came in, there are rules and then there are laws. You have the regulatory body, the NERC. So how or why is it that they couldn't hold them accountable? Because if you have targets that you have promised Nigerians that you will deliver, why let anything stand in the way? I mean, other agencies, regulatory bodies held other sectors accountable. Why was this any different?
Well, you know that the government has a responsibility also to provide security, a secure investment climate in the country. Nobody wants to be a government that is rated abroad by investors as one that is confiscating investments. We're not going to be graded as one that has come and is seizing foreign and local investment. Nobody less. Otherwise, nobody would come with their money into the country. The law is an act. That's the way it is. We must respect the law as it is. But as much as possible, government will do the best that it can, work within the existing legal environment as much as possible, circumvent all these obstacles and deliver our Nigerians because they want it.
Well, does that mean that if they set in place some of those agreements and those rules, if you hold them accountable, is that tantamount to seizing those investments? Because many would have thought, but wait a minute, if they promise to deliver power or electricity supply to certain people and they don't, and they charge for that, and you say, no, that cannot happen. Those are part of the things, little corporate governance issues and regulatory issues that when that happens, I don't think anybody will frown on that.
No, that is an ongoing thing, it's an everyday issue. I'm talking about the big issue of ownership myself. When I say this, we're talking about the big issue for who owns them, they are questionable ownerships. And they're not delivering on the commitments that they signed on to. And to go forward and seize and give to some others, you are sending the wrong signals. That's our concern.
All right, but at the moment, can you tell us, is there any of those power supply targets that government set? Did the government meet any one of them?
Oh, sure. We
Which
have,
ones?
as I told you, well, when you are talking about the numbers in campaign manifestos represent aspirations to be achieved. They are not laws, they are not cast in stones. You aspire to do 20,000 or 30,000 megawatts of power. And yes, so we have moved on. As we speak today, as I said, we have notched 13-point-something thousand availability. It's remarkable. The important thing is, why don't we look inwards? Can we put in place measures to use up the 13,000 that is available? Because a lot of power is generated and wasted. In some cases, in fact, government is providing subsidy to generating companies because it is compelled to do so by agreement signed between government and those generating companies before they came on board. So we're moving on. The Siemens came, and at the highest level of authority in Nigeria, Germany, Siemens did this in Egypt. 16 years ago, they helped Egypt to modernize power distribution and the generation. We are working with them. It's a privileged status that has been conferred on Nigeria by the German government, and we will see a lot of difference. We have targets for this one. We hope we will achieve before the end of the administration. We'll get to where we have promised the Nigerians.
How is government providing subsidy for generating companies? Because I know that there's a lot of funding that goes for those sectors. If it's been privatized, why subsidize?
Well, I think that the government is a continuum. This is what you have. If I remember very well, and I'm sure that the one particular instance I have in mind is the power generating plant in Edo State. I remember this one that is subsidized by up to $5 million per month. It's by written agreement from an administration that preceded us, and the government committed itself to this in order for them to come and set up this power plant. And here we are.
Okay, well, one of the, you talked about projections, and usually I would assume that the better mantra would be to under-promise and over-deliver. But what you are saying now is that the reverse is the case. But one other promise that the president has made was in 2019, when he said, and I quote, "We can lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years. That's 2019, 2020, 2021. That's 3 years. Let's not count 2022 yet. I would assume that if my math is correct, and of course he said it's going to be in partnership with the states. If my math is correct, that would say at least 30 million people ought to have been pulled out of poverty by now. But the budget of 2022 is 3% for social development and poverty reduction. Do you see that happening in this year? Maybe I should ask you pointedly. How many Nigerians have been lifted out of poverty since 2019?
But this is the same question your panel asked the president. The president did not give you an answer. And I don't expect an answer to proceed from my lips, because the numbers probably need to be worked out by the officials, and I hope they will be encouraged to bring the numbers and say this is how much we have achieved. However, again, you must look beyond the budget, for the attainment of, as a matter of fact, government is not supposed to do more than 15% of all of the engagements that are required to lift this 100 million people out of poverty. Is a huge, over 340 trillion naira needed to be spent, mostly investable by the private sector. So everyone will be engaged. It's not as if it's President Buhari who would just, with the stroke of the pen, say 10 million people are up. It's not going to work that way. It is an all-encompassing process involving all of the tiers of government and the entire private sector, and they have agreed to buy into this thing. So we are collectively moving on this as a nation, collectively.
Is that to say there is no figure? I would assume that before that promise was made from the office of the #1 citizen of the country and chief executive of the country, I would assume that all of those multi-sectoral conversations would have been had, and the states would have been on the same page with the president to get that done. So that's my assumption here. Is that to say that there is no figure and no central agency coordinating that position of government?
No. You asked for what are the numbers as of today.
Yes.
You are speculating that maybe 30 million will have been. And I told you I don't have. Is there an agency? Yes, we have a council that's chaired by the Vice President of Nigeria that is responsible, for the process leading to this. So it's not as if it is not anchored. It is anchored under the Vice President of Nigeria.
I think it would be nice if we can reach out to this agency so that they can give us some figures and in order for the vacuum not to exist. But if, as we wind down, let me just read out some of this. I mean, I see here that in 2015, the youth unemployment rate was 7.81%. And then in the fourth quarter of 2020, 38.5% of the labor force aged 15 to 24 years in Nigeria were unemployed. I don't know how government is going to assess itself at the end of the day, so maybe we'll leave that for government to do, but the figures are all out there. But if you could tell us, what then should the country look forward to, perhaps in terms of the economy, or what projects should we expect this government to deliver in this 17 months left?
Well, the president has been clear and specific in what he wants to achieve in terms of his legacy. The issue of accountability, the blocking of loopholes through which money is stolen in the country is important to the president. He wants to leave behind a legacy of trustworthiness and accountability, and we want that. Talking about projects, the president has prioritized a number of projects that he has placed under the Presidential Infrastructure Initiative, and these are funded largely and mostly from the funds that are domiciled in the sovereign wealth, authority of the nation. And you're talking about the major roads like Ibadan, Lagos, due for completion, Abuja, Kaduna, Zaria, Kano, due completion, rail track, Kaduna, Kano, Maradi is going to be delivered before he leaves office. The rehabilitation of the ongoing rail work, Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, and the completion of significant portions of the East-West Expressway, and in particular, of course, the second Niger Bridge. These are major projects that are well-funded and will be delivered before the president leaves office.
All right, so just a quick one. Do you think Nigerians are better off now than when the president took over? From the figures you've seen out there.
The dynamics are changing. Without the president, without his standing for national security, without the support he gives to the military, life would have been worse than it is for Nigerians.
All right, then, Mr. Gabasho, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay, let's take a look at some feedback coming through from you. This one is from Professor Chris about the 2022 budget. He says, corruption, dearth of investment in SMEs, inept political leadership, jaded economic policies, recurrent expenditure, and non-diversification of the economy are prisms of our underdevelopment.
This one from Festus Akimboyewa says, while I absolutely support removal of oil subsidy, government should demonstrate that they understand that Nigerians are hungry and bring down cost of food.
Well, this one is from Abubakar Kasum, and he's talking about youth corpers and farming. He says, I want to suggest to all unemployed graduates, what is really needed is attractive packaging. Let youth corpers and other unemployed graduates feel like company owners in agric business. Government should bring them together in small groups, help them to register their company, help with land and other inputs. They will feel like self-employed or even employers of labor rather than feeling like farm laborers, and they will likely be more committed. So that's from Abubakar Kasum. And we also see your mail, Austin Ipo. We're totally out of time. Would have taken it, but we're totally out of time. Thank you so much for watching this lovely Friday morning. Can't believe it's already the end of the first week in the month of January 2022. Wonderful how time passes quickly. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf.
Amayo Makide, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Well, the year has clearly hit the ground running. Well, thank you for watching. I'm Chamberlain. So, goodbye.